Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to be discussing Python variable scopes. So a scope in Python is basically how you can access and use your variables inside of your code. In this case, this really matters when you're using functions in Python. When you create functions, you typically will create variables inside of them. And if you create variables inside of them, you may have seen or noticed in your own testing that you cannot access that variable outside of the function. So this tutorial is going to show you how to be able to access your variables from any location in your program code. The three variable scopes that we're going to discuss are local, non-local, and global, and I will show you a tutorial of each of those. So first, let's start off with your local variables. So your local variables are going to be the variables that actually exist inside of your function. So we'll put inside function, and in this case, we need to create a function. So we'll say def numbers, and we are going to store that there. And inside of our function, we are going to create our local variables. And our local variables in this case are going to be different numbers. So num1 is equal to 2, num2 is equal to 24, and num3 is going to equal to 145. So right now, we basically created three different local variables: num1, num2, and num3. The reason they are local is because they only exist inside of the function numbers. They do not exist outside of it. As you see, we created them inside of the function numbers, so that means you cannot use them outside of it. So for this, I'll just go ahead and run an example. So accessing our local variables. So the first thing I want to show you is how it is if you were to just say, I want to print out num1. So we'll start there and we'll click our run, and you will see that you may see a error, and there you go. Now what I want you to pay attention to is your error message. It says name error, and if you look here, it says name num1 is not defined. Now, technically, num1 is defined in our code. However, it is only defined inside of the numbers function. So, being that it's only in the numbers function, it cannot be accessed outside of the function. And line 9 is outside of the function. How do we know it's outside of the function? Well, print is lined up with the def keyword, and if you see this faint gray line, that shows you everything that's inside of our function, and this print statement is not within it. However, if we were to take this and cut it and paste it in our function, now we click run, then you see we no longer have an error. Now you're wondering, okay, we don't have an error, but I don't see anything. Remember, when you create your functions, you have to call it. And that's the only thing I'm missing now is calling my function. So when I click run now, then you see the value of 2 comes out, which is our value of num1. So being that I used that print statement inside of the function where num1 exists, I did not get an error and I was able to see the output. However, if you use it outside, you will get an error. So again, let's try this. Print num2 after we have already created or called numbers. If you hover on this example, it's already telling us that num2 is not defined. So I don't even need to run it. So although we called numbers and numbers did obviously work, although we ran it, that does not mean that it created these variables to be accessible everywhere. They still only exist inside of this function call. So this would not work. So that is an example of your local variables. We can't use them outside of the function. So I will try it again. Let's do another example. So let's say def name, and we're going to say print, or actually let's assign it name equals, and let's say I'm going to put n1. Now n1 I'm going to pass in as an argument. So in this case you might have to work with function arguments, and we're creating name here. And here we are going to scroll down and we'll just simply try to print name out. So in this case, we had to pass in an argument. So put in Tom, and then let's click run. And here it's giving us none. The reason it's giving us none is because we're not telling our function to do anything here. So we could say print name, click run again, and now you see Tom is here. So in this case, we're getting none from this line because I'm saying print name and Tom, which you don't have to do. But if you do it this way, you see you're not going to get an error regardless of how you use it, because we're just doing a function call. And in this case, we will take this out. And obviously, if we run it like this, we should have it with no problem. Let me put in a comment calling function. So here we'll just say name, we'll say Sally, and if we click run, then we're going to see both of those. Now, if we simply say, if we use print name and click run, then it says function name at such and such location. Now in this case, because name and this variable are named the same, I'm just going to change the variables in this case to make it a little easier. The reason it did that is because we had our variable name the same as our function name. So that's also why you have to be careful what you name your variables and make sure that they don't match the function name. Yes, it will run, but it will have or cause problems if you try to access it or call it. So in this case, I'm going to just change it to name1, and you see we're already getting that error. Name1 is not defined, but I'll run it anyway. You see our top part comes out. As soon as it hits line 19, it's giving us that error that name1 is not defined. So that is just showing you how a local variable works. Your local variables only exist inside of the function and cannot be used outside of the function. So I'm just going to take this out so we get rid of our errors. All right, so that is basically everything about local variables. So let's get on to global variables. Now, your global variables are going to be where you can access them from any location. So in this case, we are going to try different examples. So example 1. All right. So with this example, we're just going to go ahead and create a variable called name. And we're going to say name is equal to Harry Potter. Remember, when you're trying this yourself, you can use whatever examples you want or names. But in this case, we have our variable name of Harry Potter. Now let's go ahead and create our function. So we'll say function name is equal to that. And then we're going to say we want to create another variable, name equals SpongeBob. And then we want to print name. Now, we technically have two name variables inside of our code on line 3 and line 6. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we print out name. So we click run, and you see it printed out that function name at blah, 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 blah. Why is it giving us that? Because on line 5, that's our function name. So when we do it like this, it's just assuming that name is referring to the function. So in this case, we'll just rename this print name, and then we'll click run again. So after we click run, you see it printed out the name, which is giving us Harry Potter. Harry Potter is our global variable. And SpongeBob is going to be our local variable. So regardless if our local and global variables have the same variable name, the global variable is always going to win because it is accessible from anywhere inside of the code. Now, if we were to say, call this function print name and click run, then you see SpongeBob will come out, but Harry Potter comes out. SpongeBob is only coming out when we call print name function. However, when we just simply say print name, it is just giving us Harry Potter. So that is an example of a global variable. If you need to use this outside of your code in different areas, then you would have to, of course, make sure it is not created or it is not created inside of your function here. So to show you further example of that, let's say we print out movie info, and we can say in. We're going to pass an argument, but we can say print. This is the movie, and I will use the F string in this case just to make it simpler. So let me paste all of this inside of here. F, and then let's do this. This is a new movie, and we can say name, and that's just simply going to print out the name of the movie. So then if we call that function, we could say movie info, and then we're going to pass in name. Name is holding our variable that we created at the top, and we will click run, and there you have it. So that global variable on line 3 is able to be used in different functions as well. So that is also something to consider. So in this case, you may be thinking, okay, well, what happens if we have a variable that we pass in and we have that same variable already existing inside of that function? So let's test that out. Let's copy this and come down here under it and paste it. So I'll call this print name 2. I'm going to pass in a value of n. I'm going to say that name is equal to n. So that's basically going to say at first our name is going to equal the value of the argument, and then this is going to try to change the value of name. Okay, so now in this case, we have name right here, which is going to equal our value that's passed in, and then it would change the name to SpongeBob. So I'm going to call this, now that we've created it, so print name2, and click run. Oh, forgot to pass in the name. So I'll pass that in, click run, and there you have it. So in this case, SpongeBob came out. And the reason it came out is because here we reassigned the value of name. Although we passed in our global variable here, as soon as you reassign it within the same function, it is going to be overwritten by whatever is being assigned to that value after. So in that case, SpongeBob will override our Harry Potter. So that is how you can use global variables inside of your code. There are also ways to use global variables using the global keyword, and we'll go ahead and do an example with that. So let me add another block of code. All right. So when we're using our global keyword, you can simply state what the that value of that variable is, but in this case we're just gonna start working with it like this. So we'll say name Tom. So this is creating a global variable, as you know, because it is not inside of a function. Now if we were to print this out, we could say print f his name, or name is currently, then we'll say here name. Now we're going to create a function. So we'll say print name like we did at the top, print name, and in here we're going to create a global keyword. So using global keyword, and we're going to say global name. Now, when you're using the global keyword, you cannot assign the value on the same line. What I mean by this is if we were to say Alex here, then you see we get this error, and it's saying that it must be separated by new lines or semicolons. So you cannot combine them to be on the same line. So what do you do in this case? You just go to the next line, say name is then equal to let's say Alex. So this would be assigning name, and this would be creating global variable. So now that we have that, if we were to say, I'm going to copy this from above. Oh, actually, oops, back too much. All right, there it is. Copy that, paste here. Then it's going to let us know what our name would be at that point, and we're going to call our function. All right, and when we call that function, then you see it says name is currently Tom and name is currently Alex after you call this print function. So here's our first print statement. It's printing out that our name is currently Tom. Here's our second print statement, and that is happening when we call our print name function as it is embedded inside of it. Now, what happens if we just paste this print statement outside? This would let us know what the current value of name is. And we'll say test. And we click run and we scroll down and we see that our name remains Alex even after we have ran our function. So in this case, we say print name, run it again. Name is now changed to Alex across the board as we created name to be global here. So it overrode Tom as soon as we stated Alex. So what happens if we never call our function? We'll comment that out. We'll click run. And you see our name is going to be Tom. However, as soon as you call this function, which changes the value of name, it's going to override it. So even here, let's say above this line, go here, we'll say name is equal to Anthony. Now you print name and you see that name is now equal to Anthony. So once you create a global, you can change it back. That's just something to keep in mind. So this is generically going to be a global variable because we created it outside of a function. And if you were to run print name again, it would change the value. So we'll say print name again. We click run. And it says now name is currently Alex. If we go back and try to print name again, we'll see if it's still Alex. And you see that it is. So as soon as you call that print name function, it's going to override any value that you gave it globally, as we are setting the global variable inside of the function, and that is how you can use the global keyword. So hopefully that helped you understand how to access variables from different locations as far as the global variables go. And our last variable we are going to discuss is going to be our non-local variables. So let me create a new block of code. All right, so our non-local variables are going to be the variables that are not necessarily in a local state and not necessarily in the global state. These are going to be your variables that are going to typically be inside of nested functions. Are nested functions used a lot? Not so much. They typically are used in certain situations, but you may run across a situation where you need to have a nested function. So in that case, we will go ahead and show you how to use non-local variables. So the non-local variables use the keyword non-local. And here we will test out an example of that. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we could say def name, and that creates our function. We're going to say that name, or we'll say f name for full name is going to equal Ashley. So this is going to be a local variable because it's inside of a function. All right. And then we're going to create our nested function. And we're going to say non or def f name. And I'm going to change, let's type this first name to not get the function name and variable name confused. We'll say first name. And then we're going to use the non-local. So we're going to say non-local f name. And then we're going to say our f name is going to be equal to Tracy. All right, so that is going to be our name, and I'm just going to put a simple print statement. So we'll say inner function name is, we'll say f name. Then we will call it outside. So all right, and then we are going to first name, and we will then call it, and we're just calling this nested function. So let me put that nested function. We haven't yet called our primary function yet, but outside of here, I'm going to just put another print statement to see, or here we'll say check the value of name outside of nested function, and we're going to say print f outer function name is f name. All right, now that we have that, we are going to call outer function, and our outer function is name. So then that will allow us to see all of the other print statements and what the names are for those. So if we scroll down, remember that our first name is Ashley. So the first thing that happens inside of this function def name is we call the first name, which is this. So the first thing that happens is it creates that non-local variable f name, and f name is equal to Tracy. So it will print out the statement that the inner function name is Tracy. Now, being that the inner function name is Tracy, remember the non-local variable doesn't necessarily have a local or a global scope, because in this case, if you see, we run it and both of our outputs show that our basically that our f name is Tracy. So in this case, Tracy is not global, but it's also not local, because it is playing the role of a global and local at the same time. So that is why it is a non-local, because it's not global, but it's not local. So that's why it's called a non-local. Now, in this case, that is how the non-local works. Of course, you could also add a print statement up here. And if you add a print statement up here, it will show you what fname is at that state. So print fname is originally, and we'll say fname. And now when we click run, we scroll down, it tells us that the fname is originally Ashley, but as soon as it runs and hits this non-local fname, it then becomes Tracy. So that's how you can use the non-local variable in your code. Yes, it can cause problems, but if you're using it properly, then it shouldn't cause any problems. So in this case, let's see what happens if you don't use a non-local variable. So let's say we're doing the same thing. We'll say def name this. We're going to give it a name. We'll say name is equal to Ashley. Then we'll create our next nested function. So def fname. Let's change this. Print name. We're going to say def fname is equal to print our name equals Riley. We'll say print name is name. Name. Let me add the f string. F. Here, I'll copy this, paste it here, and then that is going to show us what name is at each state. Come outside, call inner function, which is going to be fname. And then here, I'm going to say the print name again to check the status. Check name status. And then I'm just going to now call that outer function. And we will say print name. All right, click run, and we should see the state of our name. And there you have it. So name is Ashley, the name goes to Riley, and then name goes back to Ashley. So here, remember, being that we're not using non-local here, Riley is going to be a local variable. So remember, it only exists when that variable is called. In this case, this is still a local variable, but the reason this variable overrides this variable is because this is the primary name value as stated in the outer function. So this variable is going to overpower the nested one. So if you wanted this one to win, you would have to make this non-local, and then it would win, as you saw in our example up here when we used it as a non-local. Other than that, you're going to see the battle of variables in this case where Ashley was first, then we called this function, it became Riley. As soon as we call it right here, it shows that name is really Ashley. So name was only Riley temporarily within the function call. So that is how your non-local variable scope is important and can be useful inside of your code. So basically in this tutorial, we have covered the different variable scopes that you can use inside of your code. You have the global, you have local, and you have non-local. Your local variables exist inside of the function only. Your global variables can exist outside of a function and anywhere really in your code. And your non-local variable is your variables that are not necessarily local, but not necessarily global, as we just saw in the previous example. Regardless of the one you choose, hopefully this has been very helpful, and this can be useful when you're creating your own codes and testing out different program solutions yourself. Yes, this topic can be a little bit complicated, but with practice and just a little knowledge, you should be able to quickly grasp onto the concept and understand when to use which case. So I hope that you gained a lot of information from this. I hope this tutorial was very helpful for you. And until next time, remember to keep coding, keep practicing. The more you practice, the better you'll get. And I will see you on the next video.